I have the great pleasure to introduce the SORIANO Award Lecture. And if you want to read more about SORIANO, if you don't know, we have on the website a historic summary of all our named lectures and their history. But in short, he was one of the fellows of Falcon at the Yale University. He was among the founders of the Falcon Society, and his first SORIANO lecture was at the World Congress of Neurology in New Delhi, 1989. Now, the topic of this eminent lecture is neuroepidemiology. And what we have learned in the past years, and there's no lecture without epidemiology at present, is that the global burden of disease, many things coming out of that influence our thinking and influence not only our thinking, but also medicine, structures, and health policy. It is the great, let's say, merit of Professor Valery Feigin, who will receive this lecture. He's a professor of neurology and epidemiology and the director of the National Institute for Stroke and Applied Neurosciences in Auckland University of Technology, New Zealand, and affiliate professor of the University of Washington, USA. He's also a visiting professor of the Capital Medical University of China, honorary professor of the Novosibirsk Medical University, a fellow of the Royal Society of New Zealand, American Academy of Neurology, editor-in-chief of the journal Neuroepidemiology, and also a member of the WHO Technical Advisory Group. He has received many awards, and I don't have the time to name them all, but I just want to go briefly into his eminent research work. He has over 480 journal articles and innovations in the area of stroke and neurological disorders, epidemiology, and prevention. He was the recipient of many awards, and what is impressive is that he has about 300,000 citations according to the Web of Science, and he's one of the 1% most cited authors worldwide in science every year since 2018. So this is very impressive. Valery is incredibly engaged in epidemiology, and even in coffee talks, if we meet, we speak about epidemiology and the effect. And the topic of your talk is epidemiology and the burden of neurologic conditions, and we look forward to a talk, Valery.
Thank you, Griswold. Really thank you for your kind presentation and introduction. Thank you. Bonjour, good morning. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, I have nothing to disclose. I will be giving this presentation on behalf of my two senior colleagues from the Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation, University of Washington, and two senior colleagues from the World Health Organization, as well as 1,750 collaborators on the GBD 2021 Neurology Collaboration Group, representing 102 countries shown on this map. This publication, and it's still under the review, and the data which I am going to present to you in a minute have not yet been published, but they will be published in one of the top medical journals. Unlike previous global burden of disease publication of the burden on neurological disorders, this publication is based on 26 neurological disorders, as opposed to 15 neurological disorders considered previously. And These additional neurological disorders included neurodevelopmental conditions in children. They're all listed here, and additional other often disabling central nervous system infections and other conditions, as you can see here. For this particular report, we analyzed over 36,000 various sources of information, large survey, census, published and unpublished epidemiological data, and I will give you more detailed description of the data sources in a minute. Using, of course, data from ICD-10 and 11, various verbal autopsy reports, Ministry of Health data, and various kind of administrative data. We also calculated population attributable fraction of DALYs, disability adjusted life years lost associated with neurological disorders, using as a reference variable exposure to the theoretical minimum risk exposure level, as we did in all our previous GBD reports. We also corrected for comorbidities, because many neurological disorders happen in parallel. And we presented all our data by age, sex, 25 standard GBD regions, 7 super regions, and 204 countries. Statistical analysis, methodology of that have not changed since the last reports substantially. So these are the neurological disorders, 36 disorders that we considered for this report. And for 12 of them, they're actually complications of other disorders with neurological signs. For a category of other neurological disorders, you can see in ICD-9 and ICD-10 what conditions have been considered. And as you can see, it's quite a comprehensive list of other neurological disorders. Just to remind you, the 21 GBD standard regions shown on this map in different color, and based on these regions, we have 7 super regions, GBD super regions. And I will be presenting data according to this geographical breakdown. For 20 countries, we also have estimates on the subnational level. And the number of countries where we have such subnational estimates will only grow over time. This is the data source we use for GBD analysis, and how each of these data sources is translated into the particular GBD metrics. You can see a very comprehensive, basically whatever we could think of as the data source useful to fit our modeling was used on the left side, and on the right side, how we translated it into the GBD metrics. For those who are interested in details, exactly what particular source of data has been used for this particular report, they can refer to the GBD website, where all this data, source data, are presented in every detail. Now about results of this analysis. As you can see, the prevalence in terms of the absolute number of people who live with neurological disorders of different kind, 36, as I mentioned before. There are 300 million people living at any given time in 2021 with various kinds of neurological disorders. It is increased from 1990 by 55.7%, as you can see. However, when we talk about rates of prevalence, you can see that the rates has decreased slightly, not statistically significantly, because uncertainty intervals, as you can see on the right, green color, overlap from minus to plus. Similarly, the number of people who died from neurological disorders has increased by 50% from 1990 to 2021. Number of people who died or remained disabled from neurological disorders has also increased by 13.9%. But age-standardized rates of death and disability have reduced. Deaths by 31% and deaths also by almost 30%. There was also increase, as you can see on the right, in the number of years lived with disability by almost 70%. But there was a decrease in the years lived with disability in terms of the frequency, age-standardized years lived of disability. Interestingly, male-to-female ratio for death and disability-adjusted life years lost was greater in male than in females. But for prevalence age-standardized rates, there was an opposite. The prevalence age-standardized rates in males appeared to be higher than in females, as you can see on top of the right slide. If you look at the geographical distribution of age-standardized years lived with disability rates, you can see rather moderate variations from 1,300 to 2,100 per 100,000 people per year. And the highest age-standardized years lived with disability were observed in Central Asia and some Middle East countries, as you can see. Age-standardized years life lost showed greater geographical variation from virtually zero, or 1,500 in most cases, to 10,500. And bulk of the very high risk of years lived with disability appeared to be in Middle East and Sub-Saharan Africa, largely owing early age neurodevelopment disorders in these regions. Similarly, approximately the same geographical variation was observed in the age-standardized daily rates, again with most high rates observed in Middle East and Sub-Saharan Africa. What is particularly worrisome in these observations is that 84% of all neurological deaths and over 90% of all neurological disability-adjusted life years lost are currently residing in low to to middle-income countries. As if we recall, low middle-income countries constitute only about 80% of the world population, but you can see they disproportionately affected by the burden of neurological disorders. We also looked at the geographical distribution of various neurological disorders analyzed by ranking them on the age-standardized DELIs. We identified 10 most bothersome in terms of daily neurological disorders. Not surprisingly, stroke was number one, followed by neonatal encephalopathy, migraine, dementia, meningitis, idiopathic epilepsy, preterm birth, neurosystem cancer, autism spectrum disorder, and Parkinson's disease. 10 most significant neurological disorders. And if you look at the distribution of those just 10 neurological disorders by 21 GBD regions presented on the top of this slide, you can see a significant variations. And what this data indicate is that priority or in health service provision, research funding allocating, workforce development should take into account this geographical variation in the distribution of neurological disorders. There was also interesting trend in the neurological disorders, age-standardized DELIs from 1990 to 2021. As you can see, overall, age-standardized daily rates decreased by almost 30% over that period of time. But for some neurological disorders, particularly Guillain-Barré syndrome, neonatal sepsis, other neurological disorders, malaria, neonatal jaundice, preterm birth, Parkinson's disease, motor neuron disease, congenital birth defect, there was an increase in the age-standardized rates, and most significant increase was observed for Guillain-Barré syndrome, largely due to COVID-19 pandemic. There were also particular age pattern of the distribution of neurological disorders. As you can see, two peaks in terms of DELIs from neurological disorders, early age and later age. For your early age people, younger than 5 years old, the most significant neurological disorders contributing to DELI were neonatal encephalopathy, meningitis, and neural tube defect. For people over 20 years old, the most important contributor to the burden of neurological disorders were associated with preterm birth, similar epilepsy, but up to the age of 55, and migraine, covering even older age group. Stroke started to be significant and problem with sharp increase in the disability-adjusted life years lost from the age of 45 up to the top age over 90. Dementia started to be significant from the age of 65, and Parkinson's disease from the age of 75. These patterns are also important in determining public health policy in terms of the management and service provision for neurological disorders. When we look at the gender distribution of trends in absolute numbers on the left and age-adjusted rates on the right, we see no statistically significant difference in the trends, increase in absolute numbers on the left and decrease on the right, but uncertainty intervals overlap, meaning that no statistical significant difference exists. Interesting pattern of the trend was observed when we look at the disability-adjusted life year lost from 1990 to 2019 by social demographic index countries. As you can see, overall, globally, there was some trend, general trend towards decreasing age standardized rates, but the last 5 years, there was observed a quite noticeable, I would say, increase in the age standardized rates of deaths due to neurological disorders, which was consistent across all middle income, low, middle, and middle social demographic index regions, while in regions of high social demographic index, the rates of deaths, age standardized rates of deaths, continued declining. Very interesting finding about the early percentage change in cause-specific probability of dying by percentiles of countries. And when we analyze it by this way, we found that neurological disorders appear to be the fastest growing cause of death among all other health conditions. We also looked at the contribution of various most significant neurological disorders to the overall burden of neurological disorders. Looking at absolute number of cases of people affected. In terms of deaths, stroke, which we expected, was the most significant contributor to deaths, with the increase from 1990 to 2021 by 37%, 165 overall millions of deaths due to stroke, neonatal encephalopathy. There was a decrease in the numbers, but still a large number of people living with neurological disability due to neonatal encephalopathy, 62.5 million, and migraine. There was no statistically significant change in the numbers, but the number still remained significant. Prevalence, stroke appeared to be, again, the most major contributor to the prevalence, 94.9 million people living with stroke aftermath at any given time in 2021. Tension type, headache, and migraine also on increase. Stroke was almost doubled in terms of the prevalence. Tension type headache increased by 75%, and dementia increased by almost 60% from 1990 to 2021. In terms of deaths from neurological disorders, stroke appeared to be, again, the leading cause of death, 7.7 million, increased by 92% over the last 30 years. Parkinson's disease has increased, though increase was much slower, only 5% over that period of time, and dementia increased by 25%. One of the particular aspects of this GBD report was looking at impact of COVID-19 on the overall burden of neurological disorders. And we found that neurological complications of COVID-19, which were largely limited to cognitive impairment, different type of cognitive impairment, were ranked 19th among all other neurological disorders in terms of age-standardized neurology-related disability-adjusted life years lost. 2.4 million deaths were recorded, and they represented 46% of all infectious neurological diseases. The highest prevalence of COVID-related neurological disorders were observed in the age group 20 to 24, and in geographical aspect in Eastern Sub-Saharan Africa. Similar impact of COVID-19 in terms of neurological and complications were presented in a recent meta-analysis of 350 countries. But unlike GBD analysis, they also analyzed a range of other neurological complications of COVID-19. When we look at the projection of number of deaths from neurological disorders compared to all other health conditions, we found that projected increase in the number of deaths from neurological disorders appeared to be one of the highest among all other health conditions. And this is even without accounting for neurodevelopmental conditions, which, as I presented previously, are one of the most significant, most prevalent neurological conditions resulting to the burden from neurological disorders. You look at the comparison of neurological and mental disorders in terms of the prevalence, incidence, deaths, and daily. As you can see for all metrics, but daily, prevalence, incidence, and deaths from neurological disorders were statistically significantly greater over the projected period up to 2050 compared to mental disorders. Unfortunately, GBD study did not look at the economic burden, not yet, of neurological disorders. But we have a pretty good study in Europe that analyzed overall cost of neurological disorders compared to cardiovascular disease without including stroke, cancer, and chronic lung disease. And that study found that the cost of neurological disorders is actually greater than the overall cost of cardiovascular disease, cancer, and chronic lung disease combined. So currently, economically wise, neurological disorders are the most burdensome of all health conditions. The other aspect of this GBD study was to look at the risk factors for the 36 neurological disorders analyzed. And unfortunately, we were able to identify risk factors only for 6 of 36 analyzed neurological disorders. Naturally, we found and confirmed 18 risk factors for stroke that account for 84% of the stroke burden in the world. Highly preventable condition. And I would like to emphasize that 56% of stroke burden due to risk factors is attributed to elevated systolic blood pressure. And elevated systolic blood pressure in the GBD study, just to remind, is any blood pressure over 120. For dementia, we were able to identify 3 main risk factors: smoking, high body mass index, and high fasting plasma glucose, each contributing quite significant proportion of the dementia burden. Overall, we did not include education, unfortunately, in our analysis. But overall, these modifiable risk factors account for more than a quarter of the burden from dementia. Smoking was found a significant risk factor for multiple sclerosis, having a differential effect on males, 18% population attributable fraction, as compared to females, only 8%. Apparently, it relates to the differences in the prevalence of smoking among males and females. In Parkinson's disease, as it was found in previous observational cohort studies, smoking was found to be protective factor, protective in males 15% and in females 3%. High alcohol use in GBD study was anything greater than 0. That's what I would like to emphasize. And finally, lead exposure was found the single most important risk factor of intellectual disability, accounting for over 63% of intellectual disability in the world. Comparing to other global burden of disease study, this study analyzed almost twice more neurological conditions, confirmed the leading role of neurological conditions in Delhi and second leading place of neurological conditions in death. Currently, 4 in 10 people are affected by some kind of neurological disorders in the world, with the prevalence of over 3.2 billion people. Staggering, almost 12 million people die from neurological disorders, and increasing gap between low-middle-income countries and high-income countries in terms of the deaths and deaths from neurological disorders. In conclusion, I would like to emphasize a couple shortcomings of the GBD and summary. Not all neurological disorders were included in the analysis. Not all types of mental disorders included in the neurodevelopmental disorders. It's still 2 minutes up to 30. Yeah, I was given 30 minutes. Sorry, I'm counting it. We did not analyze the whole spectrum of neurological complications of COVID-19. And we assume independence in disability sequelae when comparing for comorbidity corrections, which can lead to estimation of the non-fatal burden. We also did not account for deaths associated with the traumatic brain injury and spinal cord injury, because in GBD, methodologically, the cause of death is assigned to the cause of injury rather than the nature of the injury. And finally, all common limitations of the GBD study, lack of epidemiological studies for most regions of the world. In conclusion, neurological disorders remain the #1 cause of death and disability combined, and #2 cause of death in the world. 4 in 10 people will be affected by neurological disorders in their lifetime, and the burden of neurological disorders grows faster than any other non-communicable disorders. The bulk of neurological disorders resides in low-middle income countries, and the gap between low-income and high-income countries is increasing. We believe that neurological disorders, given their leading role in death and disability, fast-growing burden, overpacing all other major health conditions, should be considered not just a global public health priority. They should be considered as the global public health priority. More investment should be done in improving services and research for neurological disorders. And I am pleased to observe already significant changes in the World Health Organization towards neurological disorders, which were emphasized in the recent United Nations Universal Health Coverage Political Declaration. Thank you for your attention. Sorry if I overtime.
Thank you, Valery, for this exciting topic, and it's really time-changing, practice-changing, world-changing, and we want to give you the medal. And in appreciation of your work, of the great influence your work has on neurology. Thank you very much.
Thank you. My
We enjoyed
pleasure.
working with you. I'm sorry.